It started with a shout. Not the kind that makes you worried for your life, but the kind that stops you in your tracks. I was pouring instant coffee into a chipped mug at 7:43 a.m., bleary-eyed and still in my robe, when I heard it. The walls in my duplex were about as thick as a politician's promise, and the sound carried through like it was happening in my living room. "Don't talk to me like I'm stupid, Mr. Donnelly. I know my rights." That was Jess. Jess Marlowe from apartment 2B, my next-door neighbor. I froze with the kettle halfway to my mug. "I don't give a damn what you think you know." A deeper voice shot back. "You're late. Again. I've got every reason to throw you out." That was Donnelly, our landlord, balding, smug, and the kind of guy who wore a Bluetooth headset in public like it was still 2009. I'd only met him twice since moving in 6 months ago, and both times I had the overwhelming urge to shower afterward. The shouting continued, but now it was muffled. I took a few slow steps toward the wall that separated our apartments. My curiosity was piqued, sure, but there was something else. Something in Jess's voice I hadn't heard before. Fear. "You said I had until the 15th. I wrote it down. It's in the lease." "That lease is month to month, sweetheart, and this is your third strike." That was enough to make me walk to my bookshelf and reach behind a stack of dusty paperbacks for my phone tripod. Not because I planned to upload it to YouTube, not because I wanted drama, but because I'd heard rumors about Donnelly pulling this kind of thing before. I clipped my phone into the tripod, turned on the voice memo app, and set it right up against the wall. I had no idea if it would pick up anything useful, but my gut told me something wasn't right. And sometimes your gut knows long before the facts catch up. Jess and her younger brother Caleb had lived in 2B for a little over a year. Quiet tenants, kept to themselves. Jess worked crazy shifts at a diner down the highway and somehow managed to keep Caleb in school, clothed, and fed. I only ever saw the kid walking home with a backpack 3 sizes too big and headphones that barely stayed on his ears. Once, Jess had knocked on my door to ask if I had any spare duct tape. Her heating had gone out, and she was trying to seal up a draft. I offered her my space heater. She refused politely, proud. The more I listened through that wall, the angrier I got. "You've been behind twice before," Donnelly barked. "Because you keep changing the terms," Jess snapped. "Last time it was a plumbing fee, but the pipes didn't even get fixed until last week. And the month before that, you added an administration cost for what? Dropping off a notice? You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you a crook." Silence. Then a chilling calmness in Donnelly's voice. "You better watch your mouth." I stopped the recording after a while, but I kept the phone going intermittently through the morning, whenever I heard them. I wasn't sure what I'd do with the audio. Maybe nothing. Maybe give it to Jess if she needed it. But something told me this wasn't just a spat over rent. This was something deeper, calculated. By noon, he was gone. I watched from the window as his gaudy Lexus pulled away, gravel crunching under the tires like bones. Jess didn't come out for hours. That night, I knocked gently on her door with a leftover lasagna tray in my hands. She answered, her eyes puffy, hair tied back. Her voice was hoarse. "Hey," I said. "Thought you might want something warm." She blinked at me. For a moment, I thought she might slam the door. Then she let out a breath. "Thanks. You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "But I heard everything this morning. You're not alone." She tensed, but didn't look surprised. "Thin walls," I nodded. "I recorded it, just in case." Now she did look surprised. "You what?" "Only your side of the wall. But I got most of what he said. If you ever need proof, you know, for court or something." She looked down at the lasagna, then back at me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded. "I might." I handed her the tray. "Let me know if you want to talk." Then I walked back to my side and closed the door. Something told me this wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak in the building, every distant car door, every rustle of wind outside my window had me on edge. I couldn't shake the sound of Donnelly's voice. Calm, predatory, and absolutely certain he held the upper hand. It wasn't just about rent. Jess was right. He was doing something dirty. And people like him usually get away with it because no one bothers to document anything. But I had. The next morning, I replayed the audio on my phone. It wasn't crystal clear, but Jess's voice came through strong, unwavering, desperate. Donnelly's was harder to catch in parts, but the threats were unmistakable. It was enough to make me feel justified for recording it, but not yet enough to stop him. Midday, Jess knocked on my door. She looked more composed than yesterday, less fragile, more focused. A stack of papers was clutched in her hand, and her knuckles were white around them. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd first heard her yelling through the wall. She spread out the documents, copies of her lease, receipts, and letters from Donnelly over the last few months. "I've been tracking everything since March," she said, her tone steady. "I knew something was off. He's been charging me extra maintenance fees every month. The heating went out in December. It wasn't repaired until April, and he tried to make me pay for the repair." "Isn't that illegal?" I asked. Jess gave a dry laugh. "You'd think, but landlords like Donnelly bank on tenants not knowing the law, or being too scared to fight. It's easier to evict someone who's struggling than fix the apartment." She pointed at a highlighted line on her lease. "This says rent is due by the 15th. No mention of late fees unless it's more than 7 days late, but he served me an eviction notice on the 13th. My eyes widened. "So technically, you weren't even late yet?" "Exactly. That's why he came in person, to pressure me, make me panic. I've seen him do it to other tenants too. Mrs. Hellman in 2A got pushed out last month. She was 73. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. Jess pulled a small folder from her bag. "I'm planning to fight it. I've already contacted legal aid. They said if I can prove he's been violating lease terms or harassing tenants, I've got a case." I slid my phone across the table. "Play it. It's all there." She tapped the screen, listening intently. When Donnelly's voice came through, calling her sweetheart and threatening eviction, her fingers curled around the phone like a vice. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded. "This changes everything." The next few days were quiet. On the surface, Jess was in and out, often with documents tucked under her arm or on calls that sounded a lot more official than before. I kept to myself, but checked in on Caleb when she wasn't around. He didn't say much, just gave me awkward half-smiles and hunched over his schoolwork at the kitchen table. Then, on Friday afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. A silver Lexus, polished to a shine. Donnelly. I was in the living room, watching from behind the curtains like a nosy neighbor in a soap opera. Jess opened her door before he could knock. "I told you I'm handling this legally," she said firmly. "I don't care what you told me," Donnelly said. "This is still my building. And you still owe—" "I owe nothing. I've got receipts for every payment, and I've already filed a complaint with the housing board." That stopped him. For a moment, he stood frozen on her doorstep, blinking in disbelief, like someone had dared to question gravity. "I think you should leave," she said, voice low. "And next time you want to intimidate someone, you might want to assume the walls have ears." She glanced toward my apartment as she said it. Donnelly followed her gaze. His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake," Jess smirked. "No, you did." She closed the door in his face. I backed away from my window before he could look directly at me, heart pounding. I half expected him to storm over and bang on my door, demanding I delete the recording. But he didn't. He stood there for a moment, fists clenched, before walking back to his car and driving off. That evening, Jess came by with an update. "The housing board is opening an investigation," she said. "They're requesting tenant testimonies, and I'm going to court to file a formal complaint. If I win, he'll owe me back rent, damages, and possibly face fines." I gave a slow, impressed nod. "That's incredible." "It's just the beginning," she said. "But I wanted to thank you." I waved her off. You're the one fighting. I just pressed record. No, she said. You listened. That matters more than you know. We stood in silence for a moment before she added, If you know any other tenants, he's done this to send them my way. Oh, I do. And they've got stories to tell. Jess smiled for the first time in days. By Sunday afternoon, Jess had become something of a local celebrity inside our rundown little building. I wasn't sure who started the group chat first, probably Raj from 3C. But soon, my phone buzzed with a notification from a freshly created group titled Tenants vs. Donnelly. It had maybe 6 members at first. By the end of the night, we were up to 12, almost the entire building. People were angry, not just annoyed, not just inconvenienced, but fed up. The stories poured in like water through a broken roof. I've lived here 10 years, wrote Mrs. Avila from the top floor. He's raised the rent every year, said it's inflation, told me I was lucky he didn't increase it more. My sink leaked for 3 months, someone else added. He said he'd fix it if I gave him a cleaning deposit of $200. Never did either. My mom was in the hospital, came a message from Keisha in 2A. We missed rent by 5 days. He changed our lock and said we abandoned the unit. I had to call the cops. Every tenant had a story, and they all followed the same pattern. Silence, manipulation, threats, quiet pressure behind closed doors. Like Donnelly ran the building through fear and habit, never paper trails. Until Jess stood up. By Monday, she had organized a meeting in the laundry room. The washers still stuttered and groaned, and one of the ceiling tiles looked like it was growing moss, but it was the only space big enough to fit us all. Jess stood at the front, holding a clipboard like a lawyer, not a single mom barely hanging on to a roof over her head. Beside her stood Mr. Barlow from 1B, retired firefighter, no-nonsense type, and Keisha, whose voice trembled as she read her letter to the housing board. I didn't think anyone would believe me, she said, tearing up. We believe you now, Jess said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. And the more we speak up, the harder it is for Donnelly to pretend none of this happened. I looked around the room. People nodded, some biting their lips, others clenching fists in their laps. We've already submitted 6 complaints to the Housing Authority, Jess continued. If we can get a formal inspection and more affidavits, they'll open a full investigation. That could force Donnelly into legal trouble, or even get a management company involved. And what if he retaliates? Someone asked. He already tried, Jess replied. He served me with a fake eviction notice. But I've got the recording to prove it, and now I'm not alone. I spoke up next. I was the one who recorded the argument with Donnelly, I said. He didn't know I was listening, but it captured everything, his threats, the way he twisted the lease. It's not just Jess. This is how he operates. The room fell quiet. Then Mr. Barlow said, Well, if he can't bully us in the dark anymore, maybe it's time we turn the lights on. Over the next week, we did just that. Raj created a shared Google Drive for documents, leases, notices, screenshots, maintenance requests. I spent nights scanning and uploading things people left in a cardboard box outside my door. Keisha called the tenants' rights organization downtown. Jess started prepping a packet to deliver to a local news outlet. The building buzzed with energy. Fear gave way to defiance. People were knocking on each other's doors again, not to complain, but to unite. Donnelly must have sensed it. He showed up on Thursday morning, dressed in a pressed suit and crocodile shoes that didn't match the broken sidewalk. He didn't bother with his usual slow, threatening grin. This time, he looked rattled. He tried to corner Jess in the stairwell, but she wasn't alone. 3 of us were already waiting by the mailbox, casually blocking the exit. Raj had his phone out, camera already rolling. Miss Holloway, Donnelly said, voice cool but cracking. Let's not escalate things any further. You've made your point. No, Jess said, loud and clear. We're just getting started. Do you really think a few angry tenants can hurt me? He sneered. This building is mine. You all signed leases. You've got no idea how deep this game goes. Jess didn't blink. Then let's see how deep the courts want to dig. Raj stepped forward, phone still recording. Smile for the camera, Donnelly. Maybe this one'll go viral. And just like that, for the first time, he backed down. Later that night, I found myself talking to Caleb while Jess was printing paperwork. He was sitting on the steps outside, fiddling with a cracked Game Boy, and wearing a look far too heavy for a 12-year-old. You doing okay? I asked. He shrugged. I guess. Mom's really busy, but she's been smiling more. I sat down beside him. She's fighting for something important. I know, he said. She told me sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things so other people don't get hurt. I looked at him, surprised by the quiet strength in his voice. Then I remembered something Jess had said days ago, when this all started. I just want to show him that I'm not powerless. She wasn't. None of us were, not anymore. Jess walked into the community legal aid office like she'd spent her life preparing for it. I came with her, not because she asked, but because she didn't have to. She carried a USB drive in her pocket like a weapon, and a folder under her arm filled with printouts, testimonies, timestamps, and screenshots. The weight of 12 tenants lived inside that folder. Name? The front desk clerk asked. Jessica Holloway, she replied. We're here about a housing abuse case, potential landlord retaliation, uninhabitable conditions, and a history of fraud. The clerk blinked, then typed faster. Within 15 minutes, we were led into a back room where a young attorney named Mallory sat waiting. Her hair was pulled back in a bun so tight, I wondered if she ever smiled. But she listened. And more importantly, she didn't flinch when Jess dropped the drive on her desk. This recording, Jess began, is what started it. But the rest is just as bad. Ignored repairs, unauthorized rent hikes, threats of eviction, even lockouts. Mallory plugged in the drive. I watched her face change as the audio played. We all listened together. Donnelly's voice slithered through the tinny speakers like an oil leak. If you want to stay here, you'll do what I say. There's no paper trail. No one's going to help you. You'll be gone by next week, I guarantee it. Mallory stopped the audio. You said he gave you this notice? She asked, lifting one of Jess's documents. This isn't even legal, and if this is the kind of language he uses regularly… Jess nodded. It is. We can take this to the city housing board and the press. You've got a solid tenant harassment case. Might even be grounds for damages. For a moment, Jess just sat there, stunned. Then she breathed in. I don't care about money. I want him to stop. I want him to be accountable. Mallory smiled. Just barely. Then you've come to the right place. The following week, things escalated fast. Mallory coordinated with the city's housing investigators. We received word that an official inspection was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Inspectors wanted access to 5 of the worst apartments: mold, plumbing, broken locks, pest issues. Luckily, or unluckily, we had more than enough volunteers. Keisha's ceiling had black streaks creeping across it like veins. Mr. Barlow's heating hadn't worked since December. Raj's kitchen window was stuck open and duct-taped closed. My own bathroom tiles had started coming up like loose teeth. Donnelly didn't show up that day, but his assistant, a greasy man named Troy, who always smelled like cigarettes and wore sunglasses indoors, hovered outside, watching everything. He didn't say a word, just stood next to his dented pickup and recorded us on his phone like we were the criminals. Let him film. We were done hiding. That night, Jess posted the story online. She uploaded the full audio, redacted for Caleb's sake, and a timeline of everything that happened since her argument with Donnelly. She included photos of roaches, peeling paint, expired inspection stickers, and screenshots of threatening text messages. She called the post, "This is what it's like to be bullied by your landlord, and what happens when tenants fight back." Within 24 hours, it had 10,000 views. Within 48, it had 200,000. People started commenting, strangers from all over the country. Some shared their own horror stories. Others offered legal advice, resources, or just plain support. A nonprofit reached out, asking if Jess would do an interview for their tenant rights campaign. It didn't take long for the local news to catch wind. By Friday morning, Jess stood on our cracked sidewalk, in front of a camera crew, holding Caleb's hand, while Mr. Barlow and Keisha stood behind her like proud teammates. I watched from the steps, stunned at how quickly everything had flipped. How one woman's private humiliation had turned into a full-on movement. "We were always told we didn't have a voice," Jess said on camera, "that no one would care. But we recorded the truth, and now they can't ignore it." When Donnelly finally did show his face again, it wasn't in person. It was through his lawyer. We each received a typed notice, slid under our doors in pristine white envelopes. "Notice of change in management," it said. The letter claimed Donnelly had elected to transfer operational responsibilities to a third-party property manager due to time constraints and misunderstandings. A lie, of course, but a carefully crafted one. Mallory confirmed it with a smirk. He's trying to distance himself from liability. That means he's scared. For the first time in months, maybe years, the building felt alive. Keisha hosted a barbecue in the back lot, broken lawn chairs circling a tiny charcoal grill. Raj brought speakers. Even Caleb ran around barefoot, laughing with another neighbor's kid, like the last storm never happened. Jess and I stood together, paper plates in hand. "You ever think it would go this far?" I asked. She shook her head, then smiled. "Honestly, I didn't think it would go anywhere." "Well, it went all the way to the internet and back. And maybe a courtroom next." "Wouldn't that be something?" I said. But what stuck with me most came later, when I caught Jess and Caleb walking home. He was talking about something, his school, maybe, or the Pokemon he caught on his Switch. But she wasn't distracted. She listened, laughed, reached down, and mussed his hair. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't look like she was fighting to stay above water. She looked like she could breathe. 6 weeks later, the court date was set. Not a criminal trial, yet, but a formal hearing with the city's housing board. Jess would testify, supported by 5 other tenants, and Donnelly's legal team would try to argue that everything was a miscommunication or taken out of context. But we had the context. We had recordings, photos, statements, witnesses. Even Mallory, calm and polished in her blazer, said she hadn't seen such a damning pile of evidence from a single building in years. Still, on the morning of the hearing, Jess was nervous. "I'm shaking," she said as we waited in the hallway. Her fingers trembled as she sipped from a styrofoam cup. "What if they say it's not enough?" "They won't," I told her. "You did everything right." She gave a hollow laugh. "That's what scares me, doing everything right, and it's still not mattering." But it did. When Jess took the stand, the room hushed. Her voice wasn't booming or dramatic, just steady, honest. She told them about the night the ceiling collapsed, about the water in Caleb's bed, about Donnelly's threats. She described the fear, the silence, the moment she decided she wouldn't let it happen anymore. Then, Mallory played the audio. Even the board members flinched when Donnelly's voice barked through the room. "I don't care what the lease says. You either pay what I say, or you're gone. Try me." It was the most damning moment of the day. By the time the last tenant testified, sweet Mr. Barlow, describing how he wore his winter coat indoors all season because the heat never worked, the board had heard enough. They ruled unanimously, landlord in violation of multiple housing codes. Fined. License suspended. Civil penalties open for collection. The building would be placed under temporary receivership while a new management firm took over. All tenants were entitled to partial refunds for overcharged rent and city grants to repair unsafe units. When the ruling was read aloud, Jess exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Back at the building, word spread fast. I found Jess that afternoon on the front steps, surrounded by neighbors. Keisha was already talking about forming a tenants committee. Raj was grinning and telling someone, "We're finally free." I sat beside Jess. You did it, I said. She smiled. But it wasn't triumph. It was relief, gratitude, maybe even peace. No, she said. We did. And she meant it. Because while it started with her recording, an impulsive decision made in the heat of an argument, it took all of us to stand up afterward, to back her, to show up. There was something powerful in that, something permanent. A month later, the building didn't just feel better, it looked better. Contractors came to fix leaking roofs and cracked stairs. New locks were installed. Walls were repainted. The front hallway, once damp and yellowing, now smelled faintly of pine cleaner and fresh plaster. A community corkboard went up in the lobby, with flyers about rent assistance and neighborhood meetings. Caleb's drawings were pinned next to them: dragons, superheroes, a big smiling sun. And on one side, someone had taped up a printed screenshot of Jess's viral post, now with over 1 million views. At the bottom, someone had handwritten in bold black marker, "Sometimes the truth just needs to be heard." On a Sunday morning in early June, Jess knocked on my door. She wore jeans and a soft t-shirt, a box of cookies in her hands. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For pressing record, for helping, for not pretending it wasn't happening." I shrugged. "You would have done it for me." "I would now," she said. And we both laughed. She stepped back, ready to go. "Oh, and by the way," she said, pausing at the stairs, "they offered me a job." I blinked. "What?" "At the housing nonprofit. They saw the post. Said they want people who've actually lived it. I think I'm gonna take it." "Jess, that's incredible." She grinned. "Yeah, it kind of is." And just like that, she was gone, off to start the next chapter of her life. Later that evening, I sat by my window and watched Caleb race around the courtyard, chasing bubbles. The setting sun cast golden streaks across the building's bricks, no longer crumbling. The sound of a working sprinkler ticked in the background, the grass greener than I remembered. I leaned back, smiling. This place wasn't perfect. It never had been. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. And all it took was one recording.